There is a moment in 1956 backstage at a glittering Nashville club when time itself seems to stop and the air turns to ice, and two young men who will become the most powerful forces in American music stand shoulder to shoulder in the shadows, and their eyes are locked on a bulky, dangerous man in an expensive suit whose face has just drained of all color because he has made the single worst decision of his entire life. The man is frozen, his thick hand still raised from the shove he just delivered, and standing between him and the exit are Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash, their bodies forming an impenetrable wall, their faces carved from stone, their silence more terrifying than any scream. And in this single crystallized instant the entire brutal hierarchy of power and prejudice and respect is about to be violently overturned because these two kings have just witnessed something they will not tolerate: the humiliation of the man who taught them everything, and now there will be a reckoning. But to understand how we arrived at this explosive moment of truth, we must go back to the beginning, back to the dirt and the suffering and the music that saved two desperate boys from oblivion. In the scorching fields of Arkansas in the 1930s and 1940s, a boy named J.R. Cash, who the world will come to know as Johnny, is bent double under the merciless sun, his small hands bleeding as he drags a cotton sack that weighs nearly as much as he does, and his family is so poor that survival itself is a daily miracle, and the Cash family lives in a government colony for struggling farmers in Dyess, Arkansas. A place where hope goes to die, where the land is unforgiving and the work is endless and the future looks exactly like the past, stretching out in an infinite cycle of backbreaking labor and crushing poverty. Young Johnny wakes before dawn every single day, his body already aching from yesterday's work, and he walks to the fields where the cotton plants stretch to the horizon like a white ocean of misery, and his fingers, still soft because he is just a child, bleed as he picks, the sharp bolls cutting into his skin again and again. And there is no complaining, no crying, because everyone is suffering, his mother, his father, his brothers and sisters, all of them trapped in this same grinding existence. At night, when the work is finally done and his body is screaming with exhaustion, he hears something drifting across the delta darkness that will change his life forever, the deep mournful wail of the blues, the sound of men who have suffered even more than he has, men whose skin is a different color but whose pain he recognizes in his very bones, and young Johnny is drawn to this music like a drowning man to a life raft. And he discovers that in the black community nearby, there are men who play guitars with a skill and soul that seems almost supernatural, and these men, despite having every reason to be bitter and closed off, see something in this poor white boy and they let him listen, they let him sit on the porch steps while they play, and sometimes, when the mood is right, they teach him. Meanwhile, 300 miles south in Tupelo, Mississippi, another boy, Elvis Aaron Presley, is growing up in a two-room shotgun shack so cramped and poor that shame becomes his constant companion, and the house is literally falling apart, the roof leaking when it rains, the floors warped and uneven, and there is never enough food, never enough heat in winter, never enough of anything. And Elvis's father Vernon struggles to find work, struggles to provide, and the family moves from one dilapidated house to another, always one step ahead of eviction, always hungry, always struggling, and the only bright spot in young Elvis's life is his mother Gladys, who loves him with a fierce protective intensity that both sustains him and makes him feel the weight of their poverty even more acutely because he can see how much she sacrifices for him. Elvis finds his only escape in the Pentecostal church where the music is raw and ecstatic and uncontrolled, where people shake and shout and let the Spirit move through them without restraint, and this music, this holy rolling spiritually charged explosion of sound, it gets into Elvis's blood and bones. But even more transformative is what happens when young Elvis, lonely and searching, wanders into the black neighborhoods of Tupelo. Drawn by the sounds coming from the juke joints and front porches, and he discovers a world of music so powerful, so emotionally devastating, that it rewires something fundamental in his soul. The blues masters of Tupelo and the surrounding Delta region, men who have lived through horrors that would break most people, men who have turned their pain and their joy and their entire existence into music, they see this shy white boy with the burning eyes standing at the edge of their gatherings, and instead of turning him away, instead of holding their secrets close, they invite him in. And they show him how to feel the music in his gut instead of his head, how to let the rhythm move through his body, how to sing from a place of raw truth instead of polite performance. This is the world that forged Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash, a world of desperate poverty and rigid segregation and a musical underground where the only currency that mattered was authenticity and soul. And both of these boys, these future kings, they understood on a cellular level that everything they would ever become, every ounce of their power and their voice and their ability to move a crowd, came directly from the black blues men of the Mississippi Delta who shared their secrets with poor white boys who had nothing but hunger and respect. Among these masters was an elderly man, a guitarist whose name has been lost to history but whose fingers could make a guitar weep and moan and testify, a man who had played the Chitlin circuit for 40 years, who had performed in juke joints from Memphis to New Orleans, who had survived lynch mobs and Jim Crow and poverty so grinding it would have broken a lesser spirit, and this man, this forgotten genius, had seen everything the South had to offer, both its beauty and its bottomless cruelty. And he carried all of that experience in his hands, in the way he bent a string, in the way he could make a single note contain an entire lifetime of sorrow and hope. He had shown young Elvis how to bend a string until it cried, had spent patient hours teaching the boy how to find that sweet spot where the note breaks and becomes something more than music, becomes a human voice speaking directly to the soul. And he had taught Johnny Cash how to find the pocket of a rhythm and live inside it, how to trust the silence between the notes as much as the notes themselves, how to build tension and release it at exactly the right moment, and he had given both boys the greatest gift imaginable, the keys to their own souls, a map to the deepest parts of themselves that they didn't even know existed. Now in 1956, as rock and roll is exploding across America like a nuclear bomb, as parents are terrified and preachers are condemning it from pulpits and teenagers are losing their minds with a new kind of ecstatic freedom, as Elvis Presley is becoming the biggest star the world has ever seen, his face on every magazine, his voice on every radio, his hips causing a national scandal. As Johnny Cash is rising fast with a sound so dark and dangerous it makes parents lock their doors, a sound drenched in the darkness of prison and death and consequences, these two young men have never forgotten where they came from, have never forgotten the men who taught them, have never stopped carrying a bone-deep loyalty to the masters who gave them everything, and this loyalty is not abstract or theoretical, it is concrete and actionable and about to be tested in the most dramatic way possible. The club in Nashville is the kind of place that represents everything fake and sanitized about the new music industry, all velvet ropes and champagne and wealthy patrons who wouldn't know real music if it bit them, the kind of people who want the thrill of rock and roll without any of its danger or truth, who want to consume rebellion as a product while maintaining their comfortable distance from anything genuinely threatening or authentic. The club owner is a thick-necked bully in a tailored suit, a man who has built his empire on the backs of real musicians while treating them like disposable commodities, a man who sees dollar signs instead of human beings, who understands the business of music but has no feeling for music itself, no respect for the artists who create it, no appreciation for the decades of suffering and genius that go into a truly great performance, and he runs his club like a tyrant, barking orders, pushing people around, secure in his power because he controls the stage and the audience and the money. On this particular night in 1956 he has booked both Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash for a special performance, a double bill that will pack the house with screaming fans and fill his pockets with cash, and he is preening with self-satisfaction, convinced that his business acumen has created this opportunity, completely blind to the fact that he is merely a middleman, a parasite feeding off the talent and work of others. But what he doesn't know, what he cannot possibly understand because his entire worldview is built on hierarchy and control and the belief that money equals power, is that these two young kings operate by a completely different code, a code forged in poverty and loyalty and an unbreakable bond with the men who made them, a code that says some things are more important than money or fame or career advancement, a code that says you never, ever forget where you came from and you never turn your back on the people who lifted you up. Backstage, the atmosphere is electric with anticipation, equipment is being hauled in by sweating roadies, guitars are being tuned, sound checks are being run, and there is that particular buzz that happens before a major show, a mixture of excitement and nervousness and creative energy, and Elvis is in one corner going through his vocal warm-ups, and Johnny Cash is in another corner with his band. And everyone is focused on the performance ahead, on giving the audience something they will never forget. Then, through the back entrance meant for deliveries and staff, an elderly black man appears, moving slowly because his joints ache from decades of hard living and his back is bent from years of carrying his guitar from gig to gig, and he is dressed in his best clothes, a suit that has seen better days but is clean and pressed, and his guitar case is held carefully in his weathered hands. Those magical hands that taught two future kings how to make music that could change the world, and he is here because Elvis himself had invited him, had personally called him on the telephone and said, "I want you there. I want you to see this. You deserve to be part of this. You are the reason any of this is possible." And the old man had made the long journey to Nashville with a heart full of pride and hope, never imagining what was about to happen, never suspecting that the simple act of walking through a door would trigger a confrontation that would define the character of two legends. The club owner spots him immediately, this elderly black musician walking through his pristine backstage area as if he has a right to be there, and his face twists with rage and disgust, and you can see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the instant assessment that this old man has no power, no protection, no ability to fight back, and he moves fast, his bulk propelling him forward like a charging bull. And he doesn't ask questions, doesn't pause to think, doesn't consider that this man might be someone's guest or someone important. He just grabs the old man by the shoulder with a grip designed to hurt, and shoves him hard toward the door, and his voice is loud and ugly as he snarls, "We don't allow your kind in here. You get out right now before I have you arrested, before I call the police and have you dragged out of here." And the old man stumbles from the force of the shove, his guitar case nearly slipping from his hands. And he has to catch himself against the wall to keep from falling, and the humiliation that washes over his face is devastating. Decades of this same treatment written in every line of his weathered features, every insult, every rejection, every moment of being made to feel less than human, and for a moment it seems like he will simply turn and leave, like he has done 1,000 times before. Because what choice does a man like him have in 1956 America? What power does he have against a white club owner who can call the police and have him arrested for trespassing or vagrancy or any of 100 other charges designed to keep black people in their place? But he doesn't leave, because at that exact instant, two figures emerge from the shadows, and they have seen everything, every moment of the confrontation, the shove, the ugly words, the humiliation, and they are moving with lethal purpose, and the temperature in the room plummets, and everyone who is paying attention suddenly feels the shift, the dangerous charge in the air that signals something serious is about to happen. Elvis Presley steps into the light first, and he is transformed, the pretty boy smile completely gone, replaced by something cold and dangerous, and anyone who thinks Elvis is just a good-looking kid who shakes his hips doesn't understand what is happening in this moment, doesn't see the steel core that was forged in the poverty of Tupelo. The fierce protective instinct that comes from growing up with nothing and knowing exactly what it means to be disrespected and powerless, and his eyes are locked on the club owner with an intensity that could burn through steel, and right beside him is Johnny Cash, and if Elvis looks dangerous, Cash looks absolutely lethal, his face carved from granite, his dark eyes flat and dead in promising violence, and there is something about Cash in this moment that is truly frightening, a darkness that seems to rise up from some deep well inside him, and these two men, these two future legends, they move as one unit, their bodies forming a wall between the club owner and the old man, and the silence that falls is absolute and terrifying, the kind of silence that comes before an explosion. The club owner tries to bluster, tries to reassert his authority because that is all he knows, intimidation and control, and his mouth opens to bark an order, probably to tell these young punks to mind their own business, to get back to their dressing rooms and prepare for the show. But before he can speak, Elvis is in his face, and despite being younger and slimmer, Elvis radiates such coiled physical menace that the bigger man actually takes a step back, and Elvis's voice when it comes is low and shaking with fury, and he says, "That man is our guest, that man is our teacher, that man has more talent in his little finger than you will ever see in your entire life. And you just put your hands on him, you just disrespected him, and that is not going to stand. And Johnny Cash moves closer, closing the circle, cutting off any escape route, and his voice is even quieter than Elvis's. A deadly whisper that cuts through the air like a razor, and he says, "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to apologize to this man, you are going to get down on your knees if you have to, and you are going to tell him you are sorry, you are going to treat him with the respect he deserves, you are going to give him the best seat in this entire club, front and center where everyone can see him, and if you don't, if you say one more disrespectful word, if you so much as look at him wrong, we walk, both of us, right now. And you can explain to the 1,000 people out there and to the newspapers and to everyone who paid top dollar why there is no show tonight, why Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash refused to perform in your club." The club owner's face goes through a series of transformations: shock because these kids are actually challenging him, rage because how dare they threaten him in his own establishment, disbelief because this cannot be happening, they wouldn't actually walk away from this much money and exposure, and then, as the reality of his situation crashes down on him like a physical weight, something like fear. Because he understands in this moment that he has no power here, that these two young men hold all the cards, that without them his club is worthless, the crowd will riot, the newspapers will destroy him, his reputation will be ruined, and more than that, he sees something in their eyes that tells him they are not bluffing, they will absolutely walk away from thousands of dollars and massive exposure if he doesn't bend, because their loyalty to this old man is more important than money or fame or anything else. And this is incomprehensible to him, it violates everything he believes about how the world works, but the evidence is right in front of him, two young men willing to sacrifice everything for a principle. The standoff stretches for what feels like an eternity, the bulky club owner's breathing harsh and ragged, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead despite the coolness of the backstage area. And you can see the exact moment when his will breaks, when the reality of who has the real power in this room becomes undeniable. When he understands that all his money and his connections and his bluster mean nothing in the face of their united determination, and his shoulders slump and his eyes drop and he mutters something that might be an apology, the words barely audible, and Elvis doesn't move, doesn't blink, just says in that same dangerous quiet voice, louder, "Say it so he can hear you. Say it so everyone can hear you," and the club owner has no choice, his voice louder now, actually apologizing to the elderly musician, the words tasting like poison in his mouth, each syllable a humiliation, and Johnny Cash, his face still expressionless, says, "Now show us to his table, the best table you have, right up front," and it is not a request, it is a command, and the club owner, this man who has bullied and brutalized his way to success, who has stepped on countless people to build his little empire, has been utterly, completely defeated by two young men who refuse to play by his rules. What happens next is something that everyone present will remember for the rest of their lives, a moment that will be told and retold in the music world for decades, a story that proves these two men are different, that they are more than just talented performers. Elvis and Johnny Cash, with the gentleness of true respect, with a tenderness that stands in stark contrast to the violence that was hovering in the air just moments before, help the elderly musician to his feet, and they walk with him, one on each side like an honor guard, like he is royalty, through the backstage area where everyone has stopped what they are doing to watch, through the wings where the stage crew stands frozen in amazement, and out into the main club where the audience is already gathering, and the crowd which had been buzzing with anticipation falls into stunned silence as they watch these two rising superstars escort an unknown elderly black musician to a table right at the front, right in the center, the best seat in the entire house, and they don't just seat him, they stay with him, talking to him, laughing with him, making sure he has everything he needs, asking if he wants a drink, if he is comfortable, treating him with the kind of respect usually reserved for heads of state. And the message is unmistakable and powerful: this man matters, this man is important, this man is the reason we are here, and if you have a problem with that, then you have a problem with us. When Elvis and Cash finally take the stage that night, the energy is different, charged with something beyond the usual excitement of a rock and roll show, and they play like men possessed, like they are channeling every lesson they ever learned, every moment of struggle, every ounce of gratitude they feel toward the man sitting in the front row, and several times during the performance they stop and point to the elderly musician and tell the crowd, "That man right there taught me everything I know. That man is the real deal. That man is why rock and roll exists." And the crowd erupts, and some people understand what they are witnessing, understand the deeper meaning of this public acknowledgement, and others are just confused, wondering who this old man is. But everyone feels the intensity, the sincerity, the profound respect radiating from the stage, and the old man, his eyes shining with tears that he doesn't bother to hide, watches these two boys he taught become giants in front of his eyes, and he knows that they never forgot him, never turned their backs on him, never let success erase the memory of where they came from, and in this moment all the pain and struggle and humiliation of his life is transformed into something transcendent, into proof that his music mattered, that his life mattered, that the lessons he taught were heard and valued and will be passed on to future generations. This moment in 1956 is not just a backstage confrontation, it is a statement of loyalty and honor that cuts through the ugliness of the era. It is two young men using the power they have earned to protect the man who gave them their voice. It is the blues coming full circle, the student protecting the teacher, the new generation refusing to abandon the old, and in that refusal, in that fierce protective stance, Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash prove that they are not just talented performers, they are men of principle, men who understand that real power is not about domination but about using your strength to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Men who know that fame and fortune are meaningless if you lose your soul in the pursuit of them. The story of this night spreads quietly through the music world, whispered in dressing rooms and rehearsal spaces, told with a mixture of admiration and disbelief, and it becomes part of the legend of both men, proof that beneath the fame and the screaming fans and the money, there beats a heart that remembers, that honors, that refuses to forget the shoulders upon which they stand, and for other musicians, especially black musicians who have been exploited and disrespected for decades, this story is a beacon of hope, proof that not everyone in this business is a user and a taker, that some people still understand respect and loyalty, and the deep debt that white rock and roll owes to black blues. In the years that follow, as Elvis becomes the king of rock and roll and as Johnny Cash becomes the man in black, a voice for the forgotten and the downtrodden, this moment remains a touchstone, a reminder of who they really are beneath the mythology, and whenever they cross paths over the decades, at awards shows or festivals or chance encounters, there is an unspoken bond between them, forged in that backstage moment when they stood together against injustice and won, when they chose principle over profit and loyalty over career advancement, and that bond never breaks, never weakens, because it was forged in fire and truth. The elderly musician, his name lost to time but his impact immeasurable, lived to see both of his students become legends, and he carried with him until his death the memory of two young kings who refused to let him be treated as less than he was, who stood up when it mattered, who proved that loyalty and respect are more powerful than prejudice and greed, and when he finally passed away years later, both Elvis and Cash made sure he was honored, made sure his funeral was attended, made sure his family knew that he mattered, that he was loved, that his legacy would live on through the music they made and the principles they upheld. And in the end, that is the true story of rock and roll, not the sanitized version sold in record stores, but the real story of poor boys, black and white, sharing their pain and their genius and their humanity in a world designed to keep them apart. And of two men who became kings, never forgetting that their crown was earned on the backs and the brilliance of the forgotten masters who came before them, and who used their power, when it mattered most, to protect and honor the man who gave them everything.